Welcome to our second Back to Basics session on the administration essentials. So all the things that you need to know in terms of paperwork and legalities and all the exciting things like that to lead your youth and children's work in church. This session is brought to you by the Children, Youth and Families ministry team in the Diocese of Swansea and Brecon of the Church in Wales. My name is Rachel Bunting and I'm the Bishop's Officer for the Swansea Area Deanery.
My name is Claire Morgan and I'm the Children, Youth and Families Officer for the Greater Brecon area.
So it's great to be with you today. As we go through, we're mentioning various different documents and there'll be links to those at the end of the presentation. So just hold on to the end and they will all be there for you. Before we start our session today, it'll be useful for just think about your own youth and children's ministry. In our last session, which was about planning a programme, we asked you to think about who you are running your programme for the children and young people in your local area and in your groups. What are you planning your programme with in terms of your facilities, your leaders and your resources? How long are you running your sessions? Is it a weekly session for an hour or two, a holiday club or something special one-off event? Where are you planning? Where are you running your session? Is it in a church building, a church hall, outside, in a woodland somewhere? All these things are really important to think about. And finally, what are you trying to achieve? If you're not sure what I'm asking, then have a look back over our previous session, which you can find on YouTube. Just want you to pause this video for a minute and think about your own local context. It may not seem important when we're talking about administration, but it's really helpful to have your group and your children in mind when we're thinking about how to support them in this way.
Administration can be quite daunting, but it is really important. What administration does, it helps you to keep your group organised. It's essential for keeping everyone safe. That's you, your leaders, your group, and the children that are attending the group. It's also a way of protecting yourself if something goes wrong and to limit risks in the future. It's a way of logging what went well, good practice, and what can be repeated. It isn't about stopping us running our groups.
It doesn't matter what size group you have, even if you only have 2 or 3 children and you think it's just not worth doing all this paperwork, it really, really is. There is lots of information in here that's useful for your leaders, for your young people and for their parents. If you think about just one individual child starting a group, it doesn't matter to them whether there's 2 or 3 people in their group or 20. They still need to know the same information about it. They still need to know that you're going to be keeping them safe while they're there. Their parents want to know that information. And if you have other leaders as well, they also need to know the same information about how we work as a church in Wales and what help there is available for them as well. So it doesn't matter if you have a group of 100 or a group of 2 children. This information is really important and the forms are there to help you, not to try and make life more confusing.
When you're starting a group, you need to think about what you need. You need to think about where you're actually holding the group, whether you have the appropriate insurance cover, and if you have access, are there going to be other users using the area whilst you're there? Are there appropriate toilet and hygiene facilities? You also need to think about who is helping within your group, whether you have a current team of volunteers, how many children can safely be brought together with the number of volunteers that you have, and are there any current limitations? You need to think about equipment as well, whether the building is fit for purpose and what activities you can do there. Do you have resources to store? And do you have to take things in and out and manual handle things? If you're choosing to do a new activity and your group is already established, but you want to try something different, like a trip, you still need to complete a form. And the form that you need to complete is the application for approval of activities form and submit it to the parish priest or your PCC.
Just to say that any of the forms that have an asterisk at the end, it means that we'll be showing the link to them later on in this presentation. When you first start a new group or you move locations with your current group, then you need to think about preparing your building, both in terms of getting it physically ready for your young people to come and also making sure all the background information is ready for you. So you're going to need to fill in a risk assessment for the building where you're going to be holding your group. The risk assessment just helps you to think about what potentially could happen in the area that you're working in. When you're doing your risk assessment, think about what age group you have. If you're having a toddler group in a church building, then the risks are going to be very different to having a youth group in a church hall. But if you think about the particular age of children that you have, the way that they move around a building, that will help you to fill in your risk assessment and make sure that before you start your sessions, anything that could be an ongoing risk is taken care of. It's always sensible to have emergency equipment available should you need it. For example, a first aid kit, and later on we'll be talking about what needs to go into that kit, and an accident or incident report form on hand with that first aid kit should anything happen. Before you start, make sure you know where all your equipment is stored. That does sound a little bit obvious, but you'd be surprised how many times people turn up to a session with 5 or 10 minutes beforehand and can't find any of their balls or their paper and pens. And so everything gets pushed back a little bit and the leaders are all stressed because they don't know where to find things. So make sure you know where everything you're going to need for the session is going to be stored. If it's going to be in a locked cupboard, who's going to have access to that cupboard? If you need somebody else to come and open a building for you, have you communicated with them when that needs to happen to make sure that everything is put away safely? You also need to think very carefully about where you're going to store your forms of personal information. We'll talk a little bit later about data protection, but it's important to just have a think at this stage as well, while you're preparing your building, of somewhere safe that you can store data that isn't available for everybody to just have a look at.
What do you need in your first aid kit? Quite a lot of things, really. Your first aid kit should reflect the needs of your group. If you're very active, then ice packs are a must. If you're regularly cooked, then a burns kit would be useful. We recommend the following items should be in your kit: triangular bandage, antiseptic wipes and wound wipes, ice packs, dressings, plasters, latex-free gloves, tough kit scissors, thermometers, safety pins, tweezers, gauze, micropore tape, clinical waste bag and a foil blanket for keeping warm, face shield, pocket mask, eye wash or sterilised water, personal protective equipment, bandages, iPads, burns gels or dressings, and a list of the contents and the first aid manual, as well as accident forms, a pen and notepad. If an accident does happen, you can easily access the forms that you need to ask for witness statements and to complete the information within an emergency. The longer that time goes on when reporting an accident, the less detailed information you remember. So it's really important to fill out this information. You can get different types of first aid kits. You can get them stored into a rucksack if you're moving around a lot, or in the hard plastic briefcase types from various suppliers.
It's also worth noting that if you are meeting in multiple rooms, for example, a church hall with an attached kitchen, you might need a separate first aid kit in the kitchen that has things that you're more likely to need for cooking related accidents, and a separate first aid kit in your main room for more sports related accidents, just so that you're not having to cross over and struggle to find them in an emergency. A really important part of every session is your volunteers. Your volunteers will be the main contact with your young people, and having good volunteers can make or break a group. So it's important to make sure that your volunteers are capable, experienced with young people, and are signing up for the right reasons. You may know people very well, but the best way of making sure that volunteers are appropriate is doing a safe recruitment process. It can be very tempting to just jump on any volunteer who turns up and say, yes, come on in and help us. But it's really important to make sure that you have some background information on all your volunteers, as they're having direct access to children, and you need to make sure that they're doing it for the right reasons. So always make sure that you interview potential volunteers to find out what their background is. Do they have any experience with young people already? Have they been part of an industry such as teaching, where they already have a lot of experience working with different children? And if so, what age group of children are they most experienced with? Find out why they want to help. Most people will have a good reason for why they want to get involved with your group. So it's really helpful to know what that is, to work out why they're joining you rather than anybody else. It can also be very helpful in an interview to ask how your volunteer would respond in potentially difficult scenarios, and particularly ones that you are more likely to encounter yourselves. For example, you could ask a potential volunteer what they would do in an instance of managing difficult behaviour. And their answer will both give you some idea of what their experience has been already with children, but it could also raise red flags if they suggest ways of dealing with children that are inappropriate. So it's really good to flag things earlier on rather than later. When you've interviewed your volunteer and you're both excited to move forward, always make sure that you follow up on the references that they give you and obtain an enhanced DBS certificate. At the end of the presentation, there's a link to the Church in Wales website, which has got a page on how to fill in a DBS certificate. And there's also a reference form on the Dusselson website for you to send to their referees. Ideally, you should have 2 references. One of them should be from their previous work, and at least one of them should be for some work that they've done around children, so you can make sure that you are checking what their experience is specifically with children. All volunteers in whatever capacity must take the St Padans Institute Safeguarding online training. This happens over 2 sessions, and at the moment is all on Zoom, so it's nice and easy, you don't have to go anywhere. And it's really important to make sure that all your volunteers have undergone this training. It's not too difficult, it's just a way of making sure that your common knowledge is definitely there, and that leaders know what to do if there's a problem, or how to alert potential safeguarding issues with your young people. This is a really important way of protecting the young people in your group. We as the church form a part of a community of people around children. So combined with the information that we can get from young people in church groups, when that's put together with their schools, with any other agencies that they're working with other clubs, for children who are in vulnerable situations, we can be a really important part of that team to help and protect them and safeguard them into the future. But the only way we can do that is by doing the safeguarding training to make sure that we know how and what we're looking out for.
What forms do volunteers need to fill in? Although it can be off-putting, there are some simple forms that volunteers should fill in before they begin working with children. As Rachel's already mentioned, the volunteer application form needs to be completed, and from that you will request references. There's also an ICT agreement form and a safeguarding agreement, as well as a code of conduct for volunteers. All of these forms are available on the diocesan website, and we'll be providing a link at the end of the session so you can see exactly what we're talking about, but they're all very, very important for you to keep on file to have information about your volunteers.
There's also a number of policies that is really useful for your volunteers to know about for their own background information. These aren't policies that you need to make sure are available necessarily every week, but your volunteers need to know where they can access them if they need to. Having the opportunity to read through the following policies is the best way of making sure that leaders know what is expected of them and where they can go if they need support. So on the Diocesan website, you can find the safeguarding policy for the Church in Wales, an equal opportunities policy, the online safeguarding policy, which is really important, both in terms of running groups online, such as over Zoom, and also for volunteers' interaction with young people and their families on social media outside of the group. Because you need to remember that we're in a community where we know people outside of church. So you may be friends with children's parents, in which case knowing what's acceptable behaviour on social media in terms of the church is really important. There's also a code of practice that leaders know how they should be behaving as leaders in their groups. There's a whistleblowing policy and a bullying and harassment policy, which your leaders can access if they need them. Hopefully they won't, but knowing where they are is really important.
What forms do my young people need to fill in? So everyone that comes along to your group needs to fill in forms, as well as the volunteers and the leaders. So it's really important to have consent for the young people that are attending the group and for them to take part in associated activities with consent. So when you start in the group, the young person's parent or guardian should fill in a joining form. This should include a photo or video consent. The young person themselves should also be encouraged to sign a code of conduct and behaviour agreed on by the group of members. This will help you then to deal with any behaviour issues as everyone has signed up to behave in an appropriate way during the sessions. As time goes on, you may also need to obtain consent to contact young people electronically, whether through Zoom or video calls or through other electronic communication. You must have parental consent for this and should read the online safeguarding guidance before beginning to contact members in this way.
Most of the forms that we've talked about already, you need to fill in before the session is running, but there are some things that's useful to have on the night itself. You don't want to be worrying about doing the paperwork while young people are in the room with you. There's lots of other things to distract your attention at the time. So it's important to have done all of your paperwork preparation before they arrive. So in order for a group to run smoothly, you need to ensure that each week you have a register to keep track of who is there. If you already have a register set up, you can just sign people in and out without needing to worry too much. At the moment, this is especially important with contact tracing. When you've got your register of young people, you can use that for the same reason if it's necessary. As time goes on, though, I suspect that this may become less of a legal requirement, but the register is still important anyway. So you may choose to use a physical register where you can just tick children in or out, or you could create an online form such as Jotform or Google Forms to minimise the risk of losing your piece of paper and forgetting who is there. This also means that if you have different leaders each week, that somebody else can just log into your form and put in the information for you if your main leader isn't there for any reason. The Church in Wales Session Record provides a very useful template for recording a weekly session. And this is also a good one because it has space for you to record details of things on your risk assessment that have changed on the day, or if there's any incidents, it gives you space to mark actions for following weeks to make sure that things aren't repeated. As well as your risk assessment for the building itself, you should also do a risk assessment for each activity. This doesn't need to be a massive form every time, but should be available for all volunteers so they can pass this information on safely to their young people. For example, if you are doing an activity with 5-year-olds that involves cutting out things with scissors, then you probably that scissors are mentioned in your risk assessment. If you are cooking with your children for any reason, then making sure that burns and cuts are mentioned in your risk assessment. This doesn't mean that you can't do the activities. It just means that you need to make sure that you've done whatever you can to minimise the risk to the young people. It's important for young people to be able to take risks in groups, but it needs to be done safely so that they don't undertake any more risk than they need to for the activity in question.
Do I need to do anything afterwards? Yes, you do. Fill in your session record. So make sure you fill in your register and record any incidents or accidents or any learning points before you forget them. If you're running multiple groups on the same night, then make sure this is done between groups so you don't get mixed up with what's happened. Make sure you replenish your supplies as well. This may mean buying some new paper or craft materials, restocking the tea bags, or making sure that any first aid equipment that was used is refilled as soon as possible. The person responsible should know what they need and when it's needed by. Communicate with parents. Let parents know what you've been doing and speak to individual parents in the case of accidents or incidents. Send a reminder if you're going to be outside of your normal meeting space or if you're meeting at a different time next week. It's always really handy to have someone on the door when people are coming in and leaving. You're building a relationship with your families then, and you can update them on information and even make announcements to everyone who's waiting outside for their children.
What if there's an issue? The likelihood is that at some point there will be a problem that comes up. Running a group is never risk-free. And we wouldn't want it to be risk-free either. Part of the joy of coming to groups for young people is the opportunity to take risks in a safe environment and to learn and stretch themselves. But you have a responsibility to minimise the risk and to know how to respond to an accident or incident when it happens. So for any accidents, incidents, or even near misses, make sure you fill in an incident report form. This is to make sure that changes can be made to prevent it happening in future. The form should be given to the church health and safety officer with a copy to the parish safeguarding coordinator if it's appropriate for the incident itself. Parents should also be made aware as soon as possible that any incidents involving their children. It could be when they pick them up, just having a chat with them at the door, or in some cases it might be more appropriate to text them when they get home. But it's better coming from you than from their young person to make sure that all the information that you give them is accurate. If a child is more seriously injured and needs to go to hospital, then make sure that you send a copy of the accident report form that you filled in with them for the medical professionals. If their parent is taking them, which is most likely, they weren't there when the incident happened. So you need to make sure that you can put as much information as possible onto that form for people to follow up with afterwards. In the event of a safeguarding disclosure, then always fill in the safeguarding report form and pass it on to the safeguarding coordinator within 24 hours. It's important that you fill it in as soon as possible because you don't know what else is happening in that child's life that could be an ongoing risk. For more information on reporting and disclosure, there is a lot more information that goes around that. You need to make sure you refer to your safeguarding training. That is another. There's also quite a lot of information in the safeguarding policies and practices documents, which are all available on the diocesan and the provincial websites.
If you're feeling inundated and worried that this is just too much paperwork, we really don't want you to panic. We're here to help you. We have to fill out lots of forms ourselves, and we're here, the CIFO team are here to talk through the various forms with you whenever you need a reminder, and we'll do our best to help you with the forms. It looks a lot, but when you start working through things, you're not going to need all of the forms every week. So you could have a folder of things that you need for each session, and then you could have other things that you are just referring to. So a lot of it can be stored away for reference when you need it. After you've done your weekly paperwork a couple of times, it'll become easier and a bit of a habit. You'll just know exactly what you're going to be writing into each section, and it'll be a very quick update for you to do, or one of your volunteers. Paperwork might not be for you, it's not for everyone. So just see if there's someone within your church who enjoys administration and paperwork and doesn't mind volunteering and will be able to help you with the administration side of your groups. Some people do enjoy the detail of filling out forms and making sure that everything's in the right place in the right order.
Storage and data protection is also an important part of your responsibility around children and young people. Filling in a joining form, young people are giving you information that is personal information and which is also protected information by law. That means that you have to be very careful with it. You can't just leave it lying around on a table in an office with open access for anybody to have a look at as they come through. So there's three key things to bear in mind when you are looking after your recorded data. This includes registers, even things that don't have full information on. A lot of the information, even on a register, is still protected information, so you need to make sure that you're looking after that in the same way as your consent forms. So the first thing is to keep it orderly. It's a lot easier to find what you need if paperwork is kept in some sort of ordered system. Now, I'm not going to tell you which sort of system to use because it's going to be entirely what you find easiest. It could be alphabetical, color-coded, sorted into different sections, accorded to different forms, whatever works for you, as long as you know where you can find an important document if you need it quickly, then that system works. Try to keep, though, everything in one place. Don't have several folders scattered around different buildings so that somebody else can find the information if they need it. That's particularly important for example, parents' contact details. If you are in a group and there's an incident and you need to contact a parent, then if only one person knows the parent's contact details and it's kept hidden away somewhere, then it could take too long to get hold of that in an emergency. So sometimes you need to make sure that some information is available to get at quickly when you're in a session and then kept away orderly afterwards again. The next important thing is to keep it secure. Personal information should always be kept safe. This includes names, ages, addresses, race, ethnicity, gender, religion, lots of the information basically that comes on your consent form. So this may be kept safe in a locked room, in a drawer or a filing cabinet, as long as they're locked. It could be that you have a parish office that's locked during the week, that's fine. It could be if you do things electronically, in password protected files on your computer, particularly important if it's a shared computer, or it could be on a password protected website that can be accessed by other leaders with their own logins. This is a good way of making sure that if you have different leaders who lead different groups, that everybody can access the same information when they need it. The other important thing is to not keep your information for too long. You should only hold information that you need to keep. And by law, you need to have a reason why you need to keep it. So for example, the children's information on their consent form, you need to keep while a child is in your group for the purposes of contacting their parents while they're in that group. That's a perfectly legitimate reason to have that information. However, if the child has left your group, then you no longer have a reason to keep that information, so it should be destroyed. If you go on a camp or do a special activity, then consent forms and reports should be kept for a maximum of 6 months following the event, and again, it should be destroyed when you finish with it. So the easiest way of destroying information is by shredding your files, but you need to make sure that however you dispose of it, it can't be followed up or read by somebody else afterwards.
Here are the links to the policies, forms and advice pages we've mentioned during this session. All of the forms can be found on the diocesan website. They're grouped according to the categories on the following slide, so take a look.
So all the forms that we've mentioned during this presentation are available on our diocesan website. We try to group them together into helpful groups depending on who you are. So if you're a group leader, the documents that you'll most likely to need is the application for approval of activities form, your risk assessment template, your incident report form, a session record, the reference request form, a safeguarding policy poster, which needs to be displayed in all churches and church halls where activities with children are taking place, and the Stay Safe residential documents, which is specifically for keeping children safe when if you're going on a residential trip at any point. Then you've got the documents for volunteers. So these should be made available to every volunteer, no matter what their position is in the group. So this is a code of practice, safeguarding policy, ICT agreement, online safeguarding guidance, code of conduct, the volunteer application form, the safeguarding policy, bullying and harassment policy, equal opportunities policy, whistleblowing policy, and the volunteer safeguarding agreement form. The forms that you will need for young people are their joining form, their photo and video consent form. So that's for more specific events outside of your normal sessions to get different consent forms. So for example, if your church are filming a service to go online and they're not necessarily part of your normal group, then you can just use the photo and video consent form without having to fill in the whole joining form for the one-off situations like that. I think the joining form also has photo and video consent on it as part of the group membership. There's also an electronic communication consent form, which gives you consent to contact young people via text and email and what have you. A special activity consent form, communicating with young people electronically guidance, a behaviour code template. Ideally, a behaviour code should be agreed on by your group members. For something like this, it's easier for it to be maintained if the young people have ownership of it in some ways themselves. So when you first start up a group, it can be really helpful to sit down with your young people and talk about how they would like to be treated while they're in the group. And in that case, how can they treat others to make sure that everyone is treated in that way? That way, they've created the behaviour code themselves, and they're more likely to be happy to sign up to it. The template is there to help you have a brief idea of how to start. And finally, the safeguarding forms, which are also available on the provincial website. There's a document with all the safeguarding forms from the Church in Wales. There's our online safeguarding guidance and this reporting a safeguarding concern form. There's also a document called the Safeguarding Operational Procedures and Practice Guidance, which has absolutely everything in it that you could possibly want to know. So if you have a spare hour or two, then sit through and read it all. Otherwise, it's very handily broken up into different sections. So you can just flick ahead to the specific information that you need to know about, and that's got all the information as well as the forms that you need from the Church in Wales's safeguarding team.
So we hope you enjoyed this session. We're going to run another one. The last session is session 3, which is tips for running a session. And that's going to be held on Thursday, the 5th of May, 7:30 till 8:30. It'll probably be a little bit lighter than this one. We won't be giving you so much information with all the different forms that you need to fill in the administration. So we hope you can join us then. But thanks for being with us today.
We'd love for you to keep in touch. If you have any questions or comments about any of the content of this presentation, or if you think we've missed anything out, then do feel free to get in touch with us. You can email the team at cyfo.swanbrack@cnw.org.uk, and then one of us will get back to you. Everything that we've mentioned will be on our diocesan website. The link is there, and you can also follow our deanery pages on Facebook using the handles that are listed there too. We don't mind how you get in touch with us, but feel free to in any way you'd like. If you have any further questions, we'll do our best to answer them. And if there's anything that we can further help you with, then do feel free to let us know. So it's been great seeing you today. Hopefully you'll join us for our next session, which will give you some more practical advice on how to run your sessions when the children are there and you're not sure what to do with them. If you've got this far and you missed our first session, then that's available on our YouTube channel. So you can check that one out. It's on planning a programme, and it gives you all the information about where you can find resources and activity ideas to do that with your young people. Hopefully we'll see you again next month, and hopefully we'll speak to you soon. Bye.